We do not advocate violence. We never told people to resort to violence. We never asked them to use weapons. We were asking for support and for a humanitarian intervention.
Police have made hundreds of arrests, and so far Turkish authorities are showing no signs of meeting protesters' demands.
Turkey is also facing international pressure to step up efforts against the Islamic State group. The United States is urging Ankara to commit its well-equipped and well-trained forces to fight the jihadist combatants. A joint U.S.-Turkish military team will be meeting next week in Ankara to discuss further action. Solange Moujan reports.
Staying on their own side of the border for now. Turkish tanks continue to overlook Kobani, even if a week ago the Turkish parliament voted to allow intervention in Syria. The Turkish government is still refusing to send ground troops.
It's not realistic to expect Turkey to carry out a ground operation on its own. Negotiations with our allies are continuing. Turkey will not hesitate to do its part when we reach a mutual decision.
Ankara wants guarantees from the international coalition before taking on a greater role in the fight against the Islamic State organization. They want the removal of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to be a priority. President Erdogan's government fears fighting only the Islamic State organization will strengthen Assad's regime. But the spokesperson for the U.S. State Department said attacking Assad's regime is not the focus of their mission, and that it's time for Turkey to step up.
They've felt this threat, the threat of ISIL, almost as much or more than most countries around the world. And certainly they have their own concerns to be focused on. And that's one of the reasons why they need to play a pivotal role here. And well, that's the discussion we're having.
Frustrated by Turkey's reluctance to act, the White House sent an envoy Thursday, retired General John Allen. The head of NATO was also in the country. Both have been trying to persuade Ankara to take a stronger position. As the discussions continue and the tanks look on, the fighting keeps on raging in Kobani.
We have to make sure Ebola isn't the world's next AIDS. Those were the words of Tom Frieden, the director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The agency predicts Ebola cases could rise to 1.4 million by January if strong measures aren't taken. The virus has killed more than 3,800 people in West Africa since the beginning of the year.
This is a fluid and heterogeneous epidemic. It's changing quickly. And it's going to be a long fight. I will say that in the 30 years I've been working in public health, the only thing like this has been AIDS. And we have to work now so that this is not the world's next AIDS.
The U.S. is stepping up efforts to deal with the Ebola contagion. 6 military planes arrived in Liberia's capital, Monrovia, carrying around 100 troops. They're part of a 4,000-strong mission to fight Ebola, expected to arrive in the region in the coming weeks. Their aim is to help rebuild medical centers in the affected countries. Only one patient is known to have contracted Ebola outside Africa. A Spanish nurse, 44-year-old Teresa Romero, is at serious risk of dying, according to authorities in Madrid. Charlotte Hawkins has details.
Inside this hospital, doctors are caring for Teresa Romero, the first Ebola patient to have contracted the virus outside of West Africa.
I can confirm that her clinical condition has worsened. She doesn't wish for any more information to be given.
The 44-year-old nursing assistant became infected after treating a Spanish missionary with Ebola, who later died. The government is under European pressure to explain how Romero was able to catch the disease in a high-security ward. Madrid's regional health chief claims she failed to follow protocol by touching her face with protective gloves. He also said Romero initially lied about having had contact with someone with Ebola. Health workers accuse the government of trying to shift the blame and say training and protective suits were inadequate.
They need to stop criminalizing her. She's a victim. We're angry because we're being held responsible for this situation, but we're the ones who risk our lives every day by treating Ebola patients.
Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy says a major Ebola outbreak in Spain is extremely unlikely.
Meanwhile, several countries, including the UK, Australia, and the US, have announced they will start screening passengers arriving from West Africa at major airports. In New York, about 200 airline cabin cleaners walked off the job over fears about the virus's spread. And as those fears continue to rise, Royal Air Maroc is one of the only airlines still flying in and out of the affected region. Passengers are screened for Ebola when they arrive in Morocco and then monitored throughout the 3-week incubation period. Aurore Dupuis reports.
Greeted by medical teams, not by air hostesses. When they land in Casablanca, passengers flying with the national airline are taken to a special anti-Ebola wing. Their body temperature is taken either with infrared thermometers or with thermal images. If their temperature is below 38 degrees, they're free to go.
Once they have no temperature, we consider by default that they are under the incubation period. So we follow them everywhere in Morocco.
For that, passengers are given a free cell phone. Doctors can contact them to check on their health for the next 21 days. That's the incubation period.
I salute Moroccan authorities, because when you're faced with diseases like that, it's not normal to isolate the population.
Royal Air Maroc wants to encourage international NGOs to go to West Africa to save those infected with the virus. As the death toll keeps rising and as Ebola is now starting to spread in other parts of the world, the US and the UK have also decided to test passengers at their main airports and on the Eurostar link.
The UK's anti-European Union Party won its first seat in Parliament on Friday by a large margin. In addition to its victory in the seaside town of Clacton, the populist right-wing UKIP party also scored well in northern England, taking votes from Prime Minister David Cameron's Conservatives. The UKIP wants Britain to withdraw from the EU and drastically curb immigration. Here's an excerpt from the new UKIP MP's speech.
The governing can no longer presume to know what is right for the governed. Crony corporatism is not the free market. Cozy cartel politics is not meaningful democracy. Change is coming with the realization that things can be better. It is an honor to be a small part of that here this evening. Thank you.
Unearthing more horror in Mexico. 4 new mass grave sites have been discovered 200 kilometers south of Mexico City, the capital. The number of bodies are unknown, though they are believed to belong to some of the 43 students missing since late September. Catherine Viet has more.
Another gruesome discovery in the search for 43 missing students. Mexico's Attorney General announced 4 more mass graves have been found containing charred remains.
We have arrested 4 new suspects whose identities are being confirmed, which is why I will not give names yet. But the most important thing is with this arrest, they led us to a site where we found 4 more mass graves, which these detainees said were also where the remains of the murdered students were dumped.
The discovery came during a huge operation to find the students who disappeared after clashing with police. They were last seen being forced into vehicles and driven away. It's believed the local police turned over the students to a local drug gang. Last week, 28 burnt bodies were found in 6 shallow graves, but they've not yet been identified. Forensic tests are expected to take weeks. The Attorney General said a formal search has now been launched for the town mayor, his wife, and head of security. They disappeared after the clashes and have not been seen. Later in the day, he did have some good news to announce to the public: the arrest of the alleged leader of the Juarez drug cartel, one of Mexico's most powerful crime syndicates.
He's one of the biggest criminals that Mexican justice needed to arrest. It's a result of ongoing efforts by the federal government, and we hope to see many more similar successes so as to return the country to peace and security.
Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, known as the Viceroy, was also wanted by the U.S., with authorities offering a $5 million reward for his arrest.
This Friday is the World Day Against the Death Penalty. This year, activists are focusing on banning the execution of individuals with mental illnesses and deficiencies. In 2013, 22 countries carried out the death penalty. And joining me now to talk about that is Maria Donatelli. She is the executive director of the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
On France 24. Let's talk about this year's theme. What is the link, if any, between the death penalty and mental illness?
Well, there are several links that can be explored. In fact, first of all, we decided to choose this theme as this year World Day theme because we feel that despite being against the death penalty in every case, we feel that there are some vulnerable categories, some vulnerable individuals that need further protection, and that they are already protected by international law and like internal law, like mental disabled people with mental disorders. So we want to focus on that and to be sure that these laws that already exist to protect them are really implemented, because we feel that despite all the fact that all states have this kind of protections, there are people that still fall through the cracks and are executed despite having mental disabilities.
And where is the death penalty still legal in the world?
So there are 58 states that retain the death penalty. We have 140 states that have abolished the death penalty de jure or de facto, which means in law or in practice. And then we have 7 countries that have abolished for ordinary crimes, but not for special crimes like crime of war. And then we have 58 states that still retain the death penalty. As you were saying, only 22 carried out executions in 2003. There are 5 top executions, which are China, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the United States.
Mm-hmm. And those executions, what is the public opinion in those countries towards executions? Earlier, we were talking to our correspondent in China, and she was saying that their public support is dwindling for the death penalty. But there are some cases, like in India, where a lot of people believe that it really is the correct punishment for some crimes.
Well, the one on public opinion is a tricky question, because it really depends the kind of questions that are asked in surveys to the public. If you ask, are you for the death penalty for this type of crime? In some countries like Japan, 80% of the people would say yes. But then if you ask, are you for the death penalty or life imprisonment? Or if you give more information about innocent people that ended up on death row, or the murder victim families that are against the death penalty, people start to think, and they might change their mind, and the numbers drop dramatically from the 80% I was talking about.
So what can one do to influence or to change public opinion? Is it about education? Is it about campaigns?
It's about World Day, first of all. It's our main campaign. It's mobilization. It's information sharing. We're trying to educate people. There are programs in school, in retentionist countries, but also in abolitionist countries. For example, in France, there is a very interesting educational project in schools, because we want to be sure that where the death penalty has been abolished, it's not going to be reestablished by the future generations.
Has it ever happened?
It happened in some countries, yes. For example, Liberia abolished the death penalty. They ratified an international treaty, and then in 2008 they decided, despite being in violation of international law, to reestablish the death penalty.
Why did they decide to restore it?
To face crime, they said, and they haven't executed anybody. The president of Liberia assured that she wasn't going to sign any death warrant while she was in charge, but still, it's a danger when she will be gone or if she changes her mind. So we're really struggling to have the death penalty stay bad.
Okay. Thank you very much, Maria Donatelli, for joining us on this World Day Against the Death Penalty. Thank you so much for joining us. Now let's take a look at our headlines. If you're just joining us here on France 24, Turkey's Kurds protest for a 3rd straight night as fighting continues over the Kurdish town of Kobani in Syria. Ankara is under pressure to deploy troops. Seeking to keep the Ebola epidemic from turning into the next AIDS, the U.S.'s Center for Disease Control warns the virus may contaminate 1.4 million people by January. And in Mexico, a gruesome find. 4 more mass graves have been uncovered near Iguala, south of the capital, following the disappearance